The construction crew outside my window speaks Romanian and discussed breaking in tonight. They had no idea I understood every word of their plan. The scaffolding went up outside my apartment building on a Monday morning in late September. I was working from home that day, trying to focus on quarterly reports from my accounting firm, when the metal clanging started around 7. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a 6-story building in Brooklyn, and apparently the whole facade needed renovation. The property management company had sent an email 2 weeks earlier warning us about the construction, but I'd barely skimmed it. Now I was regretting not paying closer attention as power tools screamed and men shouted to each other just feet from my window. I pulled on headphones and tried to concentrate, but it was impossible. Around 9, I gave up and walked to the window to see what was happening. 3 men were working on the scaffolding directly outside, wearing hard hats and safety vests. They were pointing at the brickwork and discussing something, their voices carrying clearly through the glass even though I couldn't make out the words at first. Then one of them said something that made me freeze with my coffee cup halfway to my lips. He was speaking Romanian. I grew up in Bucharest until I was 12, when my parents immigrated to the United States. We spoke Romanian at home for years until my mother passed away when I was in college, and after that my father and I drifted into speaking mostly English. It had been at least 5 years since I'd had a real conversation in Romanian, but I understood it perfectly. The language was still there in my brain, waiting. The man outside was complaining about the heat and saying this job was taking too long. His coworker responded in Romanian that they should work faster so they could finish by Thursday. Normal construction worker conversation. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on the spreadsheets in front of me, but I kept getting distracted by the voices outside. There was something about hearing my childhood language unexpectedly that made me feel nostalgic and homesick for a place I'd left 2 decades ago. Over the next few days, I found myself half listening to their conversations while I worked. They talked about normal things, soccer games and their families, and how expensive everything was in New York. There were 4 of them rotating shifts, and they all seemed to be Romanian immigrants like my parents had been. By Wednesday, I'd started to recognize their voices. There was Andre, the oldest one who seemed to be in charge. He had a deep voice and spoke with an accent from southern Romania near the Bulgarian border. Then there was Christian, younger and always complaining about something. The other 2 were Gheorghe and Mihai, quieter guys who mostly just followed instructions. They arrived every morning at 7 and worked until 5, breaking for lunch around noon. I'd gotten used to the noise and found I could actually work pretty well with their voices in the background. It was almost comforting, like having the radio on in another language that nobody else in the building could understand. On Thursday afternoon, I was on a conference call with a client when I heard Andre say something outside that made me lose track of what my client was saying. He'd switched from casual conversation to a lower, more serious tone. He said in Romanian that he'd finished checking all the apartments on this side of the building. Most people worked during the day, so the units were empty. He'd been able to see inside through the windows while pretending to inspect the brickwork. I muted my microphone and moved closer to the window, my heart starting to beat faster. Christian responded in Romanian asking which apartments looked worth it. Andre said the one on the 5th floor, apartment 5C, had expensive electronics visible, and the woman who lived there kept her purse on the kitchen counter near the window. He'd seen her leave every morning at 8 and return around 6. This apartment, 3B, also looked promising. Good laptop, nice furniture, probably jewelry in the bedroom. The owner worked from home but seemed to leave the apartment empty for hours at a time based on the lights being off. My client's voice came through my headphones asking if I was still there, but I couldn't respond. I was listening to these men plan to rob my apartment, and possibly others in my building. Christian said in Romanian that they should do it tonight after they finished the workday. Mihai could create a distraction on the 1st floor while Andre and Gheorghe went in through the windows. The scaffolding made it easy. They could just climb right in. Nobody would suspect construction workers on scaffolding during the day of coming back at night. My hands were shaking as I unmuted my microphone and made an excuse to my client about technical difficulties. I hung up and sat there trying to process what I'd just heard. These men had been casing the building for days while pretending to do renovation work. They knew everyone's schedules, what valuables we had, which apartments would be easiest to access, and they had no idea that one person in the building understood every word of their planning. I grabbed my phone and started to dial 911, then stopped. What would I tell them? That I'd overheard construction workers speaking Romanian about breaking in? The police would ask for proof, for evidence, and I had nothing but my word. The workers could easily claim I'd misunderstood or that they were joking. I needed something concrete. I opened my laptop and searched for recording apps, downloading one that could capture audio through my computer's microphone. Then I positioned my laptop near the window and started recording, turning the volume up as high as it would go. Outside, the conversation had moved on to logistics. Andre was explaining in Romanian that they'd come back at 11 tonight when most people would be asleep. They'd park 2 blocks away and approach through the alley behind the building. Gheorghe asked about security cameras and Andre laughed, saying he'd checked and there were only cameras at the main entrance, none in the alley or on the fire escapes. They'd been working here for 4 days and nobody had questioned them once. People saw construction workers and assumed they belonged. Christian mentioned that his cousin had a van they could borrow to transport the stolen items. Andre said they should hit at least 5 apartments tonight to make it worth the risk. Start on the 5th floor with 5C, work their way down to the 3rd floor, take only high-value items they could carry quickly, get in and out within 2 hours total. My recording app was capturing everything, the words clear enough that anyone who spoke Romanian would be able to understand. But I needed more than just audio. I needed proof that these specific men were the ones planning this. I pulled out my phone and carefully positioned it to take video through the window, making sure to get clear shots of their faces. Andre was in his late 40s with graying hair and a thick mustache. Christian was maybe 30 with a lean build and a scar on his left cheek. Georgi was heavy-set with a shaved head, and Mihai was the youngest, probably mid-20s with dark curly hair. I recorded them working for several minutes, getting clear footage of each man's face, while the audio from my laptop continued capturing their conversation in Romanian. They were discussing which windows had the weakest locks. Andre said most of the old windows in this building would pop open with just a screwdriver and a little pressure. He tested a few while pretending to inspect the frames. Christian asked about apartment 3B specifically, my apartment, and Andre said the bedroom window looked easiest. It faced the scaffolding directly and the lock was old. They could be in and out in 5 minutes. I watched him point directly at my bedroom window while explaining this to Christian, and my stomach turned. At 5, they packed up their tools and climbed down from the scaffolding. I watched them load their equipment into a white van with the construction company logo on the side. The company was called Apex Building Services, and I quickly wrote down the license plate number before they drove away. Then I sat down with my recordings and tried to figure out what to do next. I could take this to the police now, but I worried they wouldn't take it seriously until after the break-in actually happened. I could warn my neighbors, but how would I explain how I knew about the plan without revealing that I spoke Romanian? And if the workers found out someone understood them, they might just change their plans and target a different building. I decided to call the police non-emergency line and explain the situation. The dispatcher who answered sounded skeptical when I described what I'd overheard. She asked if I spoke Romanian, and I said yes, fluently. She asked if I had proof, and I explained about the recordings. There was a long pause before she said she'd send an officer to take my statement. Detective Michael Reeves showed up at my apartment 40 minutes later. He was a stocky man in his 50s with tired eyes who looked like he'd heard every possible story during his career. I invited him in and showed him the recordings playing the audio first. He listened carefully but didn't speak Romanian, so I had to translate. I explained that Andre was describing which apartments to target and when, that Christian was asking about logistics, that they were planning to come back tonight at 11. Reeves took notes, but I could see the doubt in his expression. He asked if I had video, and I showed him the footage I'd taken of the 4 men on the scaffolding. He wrote down their descriptions and the company name from the van. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. How could he verify that my translation was accurate? I could be making up anything, and he wouldn't know the difference. I took a deep breath and explained my background, how I'd grown up in Romania and spoke the language natively. I offered to have someone else who spoke Romanian verify the translation. Reeves nodded slowly and said he'd look into the construction company and see if there were any red flags. He told me to keep my doors and windows locked tonight and call 911 immediately if I heard anything suspicious. I asked if they were going to stake out the building, and he said honestly that they didn't have the resources to station officers at every location where a crime might happen. They'd increase patrols in the area and respond quickly if called, but that was the best he could offer. After he left, I felt frustrated and scared. The police weren't taking this seriously enough, and tonight these men were going to break into my home and possibly hurt someone if they encountered resistance. I needed a better plan. I called my neighbor across the hall, an older woman named Dorothy who'd lived in the building for 30 years. I told her I'd overheard the construction workers planning to break into apartments tonight, and she needed to make sure her windows were locked. She asked how I'd overheard them, and I said I'd understood their language. Dorothy took me seriously immediately and said she'd spread the word to other neighbors. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with texts from people in the building asking for more details. I created a group chat and explained what I knew without mentioning the specific apartments the workers had targeted. I said everyone should lock their windows, move valuables away from view, and consider staying somewhere else tonight if possible. Some people thought I was overreacting, but most took the warning seriously. The woman in 5C, whose apartment Andre had specifically mentioned, texted that she was going to stay with her sister in Manhattan tonight. By 8 that evening, at least half the building had made plans to be elsewhere, or had taken extra security precautions. I pushed my heavy dresser in front of my bedroom window and made sure every lock in my apartment was secure. Then I set up my laptop and phone to record again, positioning them where they'd capture anyone trying to come through the window. I also called my father, who still lived in Queens, and told him what was happening. He insisted on driving over to stay with me, arriving around 9 with an overnight bag and a baseball bat. We sat in my living room with all the lights off, watching the street below and waiting. At 10:30, a dark blue van pulled up 2 blocks away and parked under a broken streetlight. I couldn't see the license plate, but I watched 4 figures get out and start walking toward our building through the shadows. My father gripped the baseball bat, and I had my phone ready with 911 already dialed. The figures reached the alley behind our building and disappeared from view. 5 minutes later, I heard the faint sound of metal scraping against metal. They were climbing the scaffolding. My father and I moved to the bedroom and positioned ourselves on either side of the window, out of sight. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see a dark shape moving up the scaffolding toward the 5th floor. They were starting with 5C like they'd planned, probably not knowing that apartment was empty now. We waited in silence, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Then came the sound of breaking glass from above us, muffled but distinct. They were inside 5C. I hit the call button on my phone and whispered to the 911 dispatcher that there was a break-in happening in my building. Multiple suspects, they'd come in through the scaffolding. The dispatcher said units were on the way and to stay hidden and quiet. We could hear movement above us, footsteps and scraping sounds as they searched the apartment. Then voices speaking Romanian, angry and confused because 5C was mostly empty. Andre was saying someone must have warned them. Christian said they should leave now before police showed up. But Andre said they'd come all this way and needed to hit at least one more apartment. They were coming down to the 3rd floor next, to my apartment. I texted the group chat that the suspects were inside the building and to stay quiet and hidden. Multiple people responded that they'd already called 911. The footsteps on the scaffolding were getting closer, right outside my bedroom window now. I could see Andre's face through the curtain, illuminated by a small flashlight he was holding. He examined the window lock and pulled out a screwdriver, starting to work it into the frame. My father raised the baseball bat and I held my phone up, recording everything. Andre pushed on the window, but it didn't budge because I'd wedged it shut with a wooden dowel. He pushed harder, grunting with effort, and the glass cracked slightly. That's when we heard the sirens. Multiple police cars approaching fast, their lights flashing red and blue. Andre swore in Romanian and shouted to the others to run. I heard scrambling on the scaffolding as they tried to climb down quickly. Through my window, I could see Andre losing his grip and grabbing frantically at the metal bars. He managed to catch himself and started climbing down faster. From the living room window, I watched police cars pull up in front of the building and officers jumping out. They were shouting commands and flashlights were sweeping across the scaffolding. 2 officers ran into the alley toward the back of the building where the suspects would be trying to escape. My father and I stayed hidden in the bedroom until we heard knocking on the apartment door and a voice calling out that it was the police. I ran to the door and looked through the peephole, seeing 2 uniformed officers. I opened the door and they immediately asked if we were okay. I said yes, and told them the suspects had tried to break in through my bedroom window, but ran when they heard sirens. One officer went to check the window while the other radioed for updates. We heard shouting from outside, and then another voice on the radio saying they had 3 suspects in custody in the alley. One had gotten away heading north on foot. The officer came back from my bedroom and said the window was damaged but intact, and there were clear marks where someone had tried to pry it open. Detective Reeves showed up 20 minutes later, looking less skeptical than he had that afternoon. He said they'd caught Andre, Christian, and Georgia trying to escape through the alley. All 3 had burglary tools on them, and Christian had been carrying a bag with items stolen from 5C, electronics and jewelry the previous tenant had left behind when moving out last month. Mihai was still at large, but they had his description and were searching the area. Reeves asked if I could identify the men they'd arrested, and I said yes. He showed me photos on his phone, and I confirmed it was definitely Andre, Christian, and Georgia from the construction crew. Then he asked if I'd be willing to testify about what I'd overheard them planning. I said absolutely, and showed him the new recordings I'd made tonight. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything I'd documented. The audio recordings from Thursday afternoon with clear discussions of their plan, the video footage of them pointing at specific windows, the new recordings from tonight. Reeves said with this evidence plus catching them in the act, they had an airtight case. He also said the construction company, Apex Building Services, was a front. The business registration was only 2 months old, and the address listed was a mailbox at a UPS store. The van they'd been driving was rented under a fake name. These men had probably done this before at other buildings around the city. The 4 of them would show up at a construction site, claim to be with a legitimate company, spend a few days casing the location, then return at night to rob the place. It was a sophisticated operation that had likely worked multiple times before. But this time, they'd made the mistake of speaking freely in Romanian outside the window of someone who understood every word. Over the next few days, the story spread through the building and then to local news. Reporters called asking for interviews about how I'd stopped a burglary ring by understanding the workers' language. I declined most of them, not wanting the attention, but the building management sent out a memo thanking me and warning all their properties to verify construction company credentials more carefully. Detective Reeves called a week later to say they'd caught Mihai trying to cross into Canada at the border. All 4 men were being charged with multiple counts of burglary, attempted burglary, and conspiracy. The DA's office was also investigating whether they could connect them to similar crimes at other buildings. Reeves said my testimony would be crucial at trial and asked if I'd be willing to work with a translator to ensure the recordings were professionally documented. I agreed and was connected with a certified court translator who specialized in Romanian. She listened to all my recordings and confirmed that my translations were accurate. She created official transcripts that would be admissible in court. The preliminary hearing happened in October, and I had to testify about what I'd overheard. Andre's defense attorney tried to argue that I might have misunderstood, or that his client was joking, but when they played the recordings with the certified translation, even the attorney couldn't deny what had been said. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for trial, and all 4 men were held without bail due to flight risk. Christian's attorney approached the DA about a plea deal, offering to testify against the others in exchange for reduced charges. He admitted they'd been running this scheme for 8 months across Brooklyn and Queens, hitting at least 15 different buildings. They'd stolen over $200,000 worth of property, and my building was supposed to be their last job before they disappeared back to Romania with the money. The trial for Andre, Georgia, and Mihai was scheduled for January. In the meantime, I tried to get back to normal life, but the incident had changed something in me. I found myself paying more attention to conversations happening around me in different languages, wondering what information I was missing by not understanding. I started taking Spanish classes at night, figuring it would be useful in New York. My father joked that I should work as a translator for the police, but honestly, the experience had been stressful enough that I had no desire to repeat it. The trial lasted 3 days, and I testified on the second day. The prosecutor walked me through the recordings, and I translated key passages for the jury. Andre's attorney cross-examined me, suggesting I had a vendetta against Romanian immigrants, which was absurd given that I was Romanian myself. The jury saw through his tactics, and the evidence was overwhelming. All 3 men were convicted on multiple counts. Georgi got 8 years, Mihai got 10, and Andre got 15 because of his leadership role. Christian, who'd taken the plea deal, got 5 years and would be deported after serving his sentence. Dorothy from across the hall organized a building-wide dinner to celebrate the convictions and thank me for preventing what could have been a traumatic experience for everyone. People brought Romanian food in honor of the language that had saved us, which was touching even though most of them had no idea what authentic Romanian cuisine was supposed to taste like. The woman from 5C gave me a bottle of expensive wine and said I'd probably saved her from losing family heirlooms that meant everything to her. That night, sitting in my apartment with the scaffolding finally removed and my window repaired, I thought about how random chance had protected our building. If my parents hadn't immigrated from Romania, if I'd forgotten the language over the years, if I'd been wearing headphones and missed that first conversation, everything would have turned out differently. Those men would have robbed us blind and moved on to their next target, and nobody would have known until it was too late. Detective Reeves called me one final time to say that based on Christian's testimony, they'd connected the crew to 11 other burglaries with 7 more victims identified. The DA was working on restitution, but most of the stolen property had already been sold or shipped overseas. Still, at least these men would be in prison for years and then deported, unable to prey on more immigrant communities. He thanked me for my cooperation and said I'd done a real service to the city. I told him I'd just been protecting my home, but he said it was more than that. I'd shown people that paying attention to what's happening around you, being aware of your surroundings, and trusting your instincts, those things matter. A few months later, I was working at my desk when I heard voices outside my window again. My heart jumped before I realized it was just maintenance workers replacing some damaged bricks the previous crew had marked but never fixed. These workers were speaking English, and I could hear their supervisor checking their credentials with building management. The industry had tightened up after our case made the news, with more buildings verifying that construction crews were legitimate before giving them access. I still listen when people speak Romanian in public, a habit I can't seem to break now. Most of the time, it's just normal conversation. Immigrants talking about their lives in their native language like my parents used to do. But occasionally I'll hear something that makes me pay closer attention, and I've learned to trust that instinct. Last week I was at a restaurant in Queens and overheard 2 men at the next table speaking Romanian about a credit card scam they were running. I quietly recorded the conversation on my phone and called Detective Reeves when I got home. He said he'd pass it along to the fraud division and thanked me for staying vigilant. I guess that's who I am now, the person who listens carefully and speaks up when something isn't right. My father says my mother would be proud that I've used the language she taught me to help people. I like to think he's right. She always said that language was a bridge between cultures, a way to understand people different from yourself. She probably didn't imagine I'd use it to catch criminals, but she'd appreciate the irony. These days I sleep better knowing that those 4 men are locked up and our building is safe. The new construction crew that eventually came to finish the renovation work was professional and properly licensed, and they spoke English loudly enough that everyone could understand exactly what they were doing. But I still keep my windows locked at night, and I still pay attention to conversations happening around me in languages people assume nobody else understands. Because I learned something important that day in September when the scaffolding went up outside my window. The most dangerous people are often the ones who think nobody is listening. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is prove them wrong. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.